undermines the readability of the content, which at the end of the day is really what this is all about. It's not about the pictures, it's about the content. All right, everybody, so it is May 29th, and it is that time for Ask Simpraxis. We have everybody here today. Let's see. But we're going to be talking about Brand Center. So Todd is zipped, no speaking, and we're going to be talking about Microsoft 365 SharePoint Brand Center. We have a little agenda here. We're going to talk about a little bit about what is Brand Center and a little bit of history, because it's important to know that a lot of folks haven't been doing SharePoint for a million years. So how did we get to where we are today, and how do we move forward? Some of the components and support, also some user accessibility, user experience guidelines, and we're also going to talk about the extension story as well as some limitations and backlogs. All right, so starting with a little bit of history, for those of us that have been using SharePoint for a really long time, back in the day, we used to be able to create pixel perfect intranets. We could build public facing websites. That's really how I got started in doing SharePoint development in the first place. I was building college and university websites using SharePoint because it was essentially free for them. We had full control over all of the branding assets. So we could work with design agencies and come up with the colors and the font palette, the fonts and the imagery. It was really, really great for consultants. Our clients got what they wanted, but at the end of the day, for consultants, it was great because it incurred this huge amount of technical debt. It needed to be updated basically every time every time there was a new release. So 2007, 2010, 2013, each one of those required basically a redo of all the branding. All the web parts you needed to, if you were building an intranet with SharePoint and doing custom branding, you needed to account for every single web part and how it was used and how the styling all changed. And Lord forbid if somebody used SharePoint Designer to edit the master page or edit one of the page layouts, that messed everything up. For those old timers, ghosted pages. I can't remember how many times I had to go and run PowerShell. Oh, Todd, this is your 1 minute. PowerShell to figure out, well, actually, it wasn't even PowerShell, it was STS-ADM to figure out whether a page was ghosted or not. But at the end of the day, we had all of this freedom, and with that freedom, a lot of people took advantage of it and did things that really caused performance issues and huge amounts of technical debt. So moving to modern, we have a lot of new things. They're starting, this is the start, right? This is them slowly giving back bits and pieces of customization to us. So right now, the Brand Center is in public preview, which means parts of it have been rolled out to everybody's tenants. You can go into the admin center and you can turn it on for your tenant today. It has limited support. It is intended to be a one-stop location to manage your custom logos, your fonts, and your themes. And it's going to grow over time. It's sort of a one spot that's going to be adding functionality over the years. What it does essentially is it creates a new site collection for brand asset management. And it also installs a new app for creating font packages. It lets us create these font packages specifically for SharePoint and Viva Connections inside of Teams. So essentially, we can create these custom font packages. They get pushed out, and we can use them in any of our sites. It also lets us synchronize theme usage between our SharePoint home site and the Viva Connections home. So it's starting to bring all these things together. It's this new spot for everybody to sort of, create their custom branding assets. Greg, I see your question. Is this also a place to put corporate logos? So the answer is, and PowerPoint deck templates? So the answer is yes and no. Under the covers, so this creates an org assets library. So if you have, Mark, can you have more than one org assets library? You can, right?
Yeah, and you can have them in multiple sites. So this doesn't
Right.
square with the way they're doing Brand Center, as I
Right.
understand it.
Exactly. So Brand Center in and of itself is a new org assets library. So in theory, yes, you can add your PowerPoint templates to it. You can add your corporate logos to it. If you already have one, like if you have an org assets library or a site that has an org assets library attached to it, you can create the Brand Center in that site collection. But it really depends on who you want to control those brand assets, because at the end of the day, the person in charge of the PowerPoint template might not be the person in charge of the logos. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. Okay, so. Oh, Julie's with us now. You can't have multiple document template libraries in multiple sites. That is true.
Right.
Yes. Okay, so how does it work? This is a really crappy screenshot. I apologize. Essentially, you use the Brand Center app to upload font files to a shared library. So in your Brand Center site, there's a special hidden library for your fonts. You have to upload each font individually. So if you have, Helvetica, Helvetica Bold, Helvetica Light, Helvetica New, each one of those files needs to be uploaded independently into this assets library. You can't like take a zip file of all your Helvetica fonts and throw them into the library. Then you essentially are given a wizard here that lets you pick two fonts, a primary font and a secondary font. From there, you can assign the different weights for each of those fonts to different headings. So think like the theme builder, where you essentially give them a primary, a secondary, and a text color. You're doing the exact same thing here. You can choose title, you can choose headline, you can choose body, and you can choose interactive. And then you can choose which font you get depending on, how you want to do that. Once you've assigned the fonts to the different items, to the different slots, you can publish your package. Once you publish the package, it makes that font package available to every site in your site collection. And so then you can go in and you can set it. Now, from a support perspective, right now in the public preview, there are a limited number of first-party web parts supported. So you can do your navigation. So you can see here, you can do the site title. You can also do the quick links web part, the image web part, the news, and the people. Those are the ones that are supported right now in the public preview. There's a lot more work being done behind the scenes. So they're working on the text web part. They are working on like the buttons and the call to action, but they're not all fully baked and fully released yet, which is why they're staying in public preview for a little while. There is third-party support for third-party web parts, and Julia's going to talk about that in a little bit. And there's also support for the Viva Connections home. So if you look, this supports the headline, the announcements, as well as adaptive card extensions. And this is whether or not you're using a first party or you're using the card designer, or whether you're using a third-party SPFx adaptive card extension. And you can't really tell from this screenshot, but I also talked earlier about how the theming went, your theme from your SharePoint home site traveled through to this Viva Connections home. Those two things, one would think, would have been done right away, but they were not. So this is a new feature so that this home can be in sync with your SharePoint home. All right, let's see, what else do we have? So, okay, so we're going to also talk about a few user experience guidelines. Patrick, you were going to talk about this. Patrick, are you there?
I was muted. I'm here. Carrie, you can jump in too. Of course, with all this branding and guidelines and more ability to customize pages, it certainly brings up the question around usability as well as governance and the importance of that for organizations. So, the importance of governance is to maintain consistency on the sites, documents, and committees, avoid user confusion between the sites, and make sure that the key content is in a position that makes the most sense and is clear on the page. One of the things I often refer to are the 10 usability heuristics for user interface design, which is something from Nielsen Norman. Essentially what it is they're the 10 general principles for interaction design. They're called heuristics because they are broad rules of thumb and not specific usability guidelines. The two that I specifically thought of when thinking of this, the new brand center, are number 4, which is consistency and standards. Part of this is users should not have to wonder whether different words, situations, or actions mean the same thing. So having a consistency across the site is important. And the second one that really kind of popped to the forefront was the aesthetic and minimalist design. It doesn't mean that you need to have a flat design. You can certainly have variation, but keeping that key information in the same spot on multiple sites helps people know where to look for that content and helps them focus in on what they really need. So while it's not, while we want people to be able to have their creative touch on sites, there are some usability aspects of it that we want to keep in mind.
I think this is pointing out why it needs to stay in public preview for a long time, because if all the web parts aren't supported, that ability to have consistency is just not going to be there. And then also, if the fallback font is Sego UI, which is questionable considering some other things under the covers, but if the fallback font is Sego UI and you're using a font, a serif font versus a sans serif font or whatever, and you don't have that consistency, then you're going to have this weird looking page that's not, it's just not going to be attractive at all. So it feels kind of like something you just really need to wait until there's full fidelity support for, so that you can make a blanket application to your entire tenant. If you're going to do this, then do the whole thing and don't half do it. You know what I mean?
Well, and having a governance committee to set it up. So your tier 1 page looks like this, your tier 2 page looks like this, your tier 3 page can look like GeoCities and whatever it was that we're all used to from way back when. But having those guidelines set up can certainly help people find what they're looking for and have that consistency without it being overwhelming for the user.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this one, these heuristics don't necessarily, they're not explicit to Brand Center, but no. Also when you start thinking this through, when you think about the new updates to section backgrounds and the new crazy, crazy pictures, that
shapes not, are you talking about the shapes thing?
Well, there's the custom shapes that everybody talked about last week. There's like the new stars and stripes, whatever, in the section backgrounds. It's just that really doesn't adhere to that minimalistic design, and at the end of the day, that undermines the readability of the content, which at the end of the day is really what this is all about. It's not about the pictures, it's about the content.
But if you've got a design that pops, people don't notice that the content is no good.
Or accessibility. So, if you've got pretty stars and stripes, why do you need, your text legible on it?
Yeah, I was just going to say that about accessibility. Having things readable, is important, and having that proper heading hierarchy and doing all the things that we would normally do. And as Mark always says, content is king. So it's just like putting lipstick on things sometimes. So I think that's definitely important. And it's like the functional end of it versus the inspirational end of it, right? We want it to be functional and also a little bit inspirational with some of those new things that we're seeing. So yeah,
And not
all
to
true.
Yeah, and not to say that the content should be ugly, right? Like it clearly can
No, not
have
at
a
all.
good and well thought out design, and you can use color and typography to make all of those things pop, as you said, Mark, like to really bring the importance to that content versus making it designed for design's sake. So like Mark put in, what was this, a GeoCities picture?
That's a
Or
MySpace.
MySpace.
picture, 'cause
MySpace.
That's where
Yeah.
I always found the best
Yeah.
examples.
Exactly. Yeah.
No dancing
okay.
babies.
No dancing babies in this one, but yeah,
I didn't
mean,
search hard enough.
when dancing babies ends up in the stock image library, that will be my last day.
Our hamsters.
Yeah. All right. So moving on, there are quite a few limitations in backlog. Limitations of
There's
where
imitations too.
yes, for Brand Center right now. And I think this sort of adheres to what Julie was saying, like, let's wait a little bit till it's out of private preview. Not to say that it's not a good function. It's really, but it's just, it needs a little bit more baking. The first is that it's set on a site collection by site collection basis. So you could have, especially if you have a highly governed intranet, there's no inheritance. So you can't, like, you couldn't do like where you have a hub site and the hub site has a theme and the theme pushes down to all of the child sites. The font packages don't do that. So
I don't understand that in any way, shape, or form.
You know, yeah. I completely agree with you on this one, Caleb. And yeah, it was one that I argued with folks about and gave feedback about that, because when you're talking about governance and that consistency of design, there is zero reason the fonts should be different from one site to another. So, you know, I feel like
unless it's product specific, I guess, if you've got, you know, these multiple brands and then, you know, you have this one particular, you know, medication or drug, you might want it to do that. But yeah, I think overall it would probably be confusing to have so many of those.
100% agree with Carrie.
Yeah.
Yes, it's by design. I 100%
Yes.
agree with Carrie, but the bigger point here is the whole point of that theme floating down with hub sites gets broken then. And so you have this sort of half done experience where you're like, oh, all my colors and all my this floats down, but my font doesn't. That's just.
Yeah, I think, you know, Carrie, to your point, the roadmap has the concept of multiple brand centers being able to be rolled out. But right now there is only one brand center per tenant. But if you could imagine, right, if you have a company and they've got a commercial division and they've got, each product has its own communication site in the intranet, I could absolutely see each site or set of sites that are attached to a specific hub or attached to a product or whatever, or an imprint, to have its own set of brand. Because they would have their own color palette, they would have their own theme, they would have their own fonts. It all makes perfect sense. But it's not there yet. The set on site, the site collection by site collection basis is by design. Did you say that, Julie? Yeah.
She did.
Yeah. So, you know.
This sounds like a good gap for folks like Orchestry to fill in, or folks like myself with PowerShell.
Well, I think that's where
If
it's going to end up.
PowerShell could be.
If there was either a Power Automate or if there was an API to do that, absolutely. I think folks are going to be, you know, folks like our friends at Orchestry are going to be looking at the APIs to try to figure out how to push this down. So the other thing is, you know, it can be changed as well. So if you have multiple font packages, because it's set on a site collection by site collection basis, you know, your site owners can go in. If you have access to the change the look button in your site, so any site owner would be able to change the font package. So if you have more than one, that to me feels like a governance challenge that anyone with a standing governance committee needs to be aware of. the other thing.
Oh, come on, Casper.
Come on,
Don't push
Casper.
that button on me today.
There are additional first-party web part support coming. So they're working on the text web part. I was looking in a Secret Squirrel tenant, and they do have some other things that they're currently working on. I think the goal is to wait and have all the major first-party web parts be brand center aware before they roll everything out. I already talked about one brand center per tenant. That is true if you have multi-geo, like multiple tenant. If you have tenants in multiple geos, each geo can have its own brand center because they're essentially different tenants. And lastly, you need to, and this sort of rolls back to Greg's comment about the PowerPoint templates and the logos and stuff. You need to be really conscious of the permissions for the brand center. And I think because in some ways, you know, you could imagine maybe corporate communications having access to all of these, but somebody else has, you know, in charge of the document templates. So you really just need to think about who you're giving permission to the brand center to, because anybody in there can change the org assets, the templates, create the font packages, although there is less risk of them pushing it down because you can't push it down. But I think in general, you know, you just want to, my takeaway from all of this is be thoughtful and think about your governance before you do that. All right, so moving on. Julie, you were going to talk about extensibility?
Yeah, so mostly this is thank you, Stefan, for sort of figuring out the details of this. And this will definitely be something that we'll support in the future for the H2O UI framework system that he and I, the open source project that Stefan and I support. But essentially the extensibility story in SharePoint framework is that these font families are CSS variables. And so if you are someone who does development, you can recognize that when you're creating your styling in SharePoint framework, you can reference CSS variables. And so the way you would do this, and this screenshot is taken thanks to Vesa Juvonen, who did a brand center video that Stefan sort of helped him figure out how to do this, and then he did a nice video on it. So if you want to see that video, it's in our resources. But essentially, you just reference whichever one of the slots that you want that has the font and font weight in it. So essentially, there's 1 through 17, so 17 slots where the fonts are defined, and that's referencing back to where Derek showed a screenshot earlier of where you set the font package up. There's 17 different slots in there, and so then you reference the font family to have one of those slots, and then you fall back, and so that reference there, font family var, is a variable, and you say, I want the custom font 100, but if it's not defined, i.e. you land on a page that font is not defined in that CSS variable, then it falls back to the base font, family font. So that in that case, that would be like Sego UI. And that's how you can then get your third-party web parts to support the custom fonts. According to Stefan, and this is too deep for me to go into, but the fonts are really not correctly registered. And so there's some work they're going to have to do. This is hopefully going to be done before they come out of preview. But essentially, if you reference a font and it's not used by a first-party web part, it's not loaded into the page. And so you can end up with, even though the CSS variable is set, the font isn't actually loaded on the page, and thereby it's not going to work and it's going to fall back. And so this could be a weird experience when you're in like a, you know, to use the example of like a text web part, if you have like some text and then you have a bold piece of text or an italics piece of text, if that italic font wasn't loaded, it could fall back to Sego UI and look really odd right in the middle of the code. So they're going to have to fix that, but I obviously don't have any more details on that at this point.
The other thing I want to point out, Julie, is for font geeks and web design folks, this is sort of a change in convention where the font family variables are like custom font 100. Generally that 100, 200, 300 is meant to indicate font weight or some level of boldness, if you will. 100 being the lightest, I forget, 900 being the most, the 900 being the boldest. This does not follow that convention. These are just named 100, 200, 300 to leave them space for additional changes moving forward. So anything else on extensibility?
No.
All right, because we're almost at time. All right, so we have a few resources, and Caleb, I saw your note about fonts. In the font packages, I believe, resource, it lists the available fonts that they support, but you are correct, it does not support all font types and font file types. We have the brand center documentation, which will show you how to set it up and how to get things going in your tenant should you want to turn it on, as well as the link to the 10 usability heuristics and some documentation on how to do custom SPFx solutions using with the customization that Julie just said. And if you are doing site design, the 10 usability heuristics are really great for you to just keep in mind as you're building content or building your solutions. One last thing for folks that want to come see us live, I will be in Seattle next week at TechCon 365. So for those of you on the West Coast or traveling to the West Coast, just look me up. Julie, Mark, and myself will be at TechCon 365 in DC in August. And if you are registering, there is a discount code if you are doing that. Then we've got Collab Days New England with everybody but Todd in October.
That's okay. It'll be more fun that way.
We're not talking about PowerShell. And last but not least, Patrick and I will be ending the year in glorious Stockholm, Sweden at the European SharePoint conference.
We should just point out the Collab Days New England, we're going to even allow Todd to submit. We won't pick him, but we can let him submit. But if you are a speaker or have spoken before, or even if you haven't spoken before, consider, if you are in the New England area or you want to come to New England in the fall, consider submitting your session to talk. If it's your first time and you need a little help, and Mark Anderson is here for you, you can reach out to him. He will absolutely help you come up with your session, maybe even help co-present with you. If you talk him into it, that could happen. And obviously we're looking for sponsors because we cannot run these events without the help of the community. And so if anyone out there's organization would like to sponsor us, we would love to have you, and Derek is in charge of that, so reach out to Derek.
Yep.
I guess I'll finish it up.
I can help make people heckle proof.
Oh, is that really true?
Heckle proof. Yep.
It's Todd.
Well, then Todd would like to reach out to you for some help.
I am also going to ESPC because I want to get that in there, because otherwise a lot of people won't go.
That's true. They're on the.
Oh, I didn't know you were going. All right. Yeah. Well, we learned something new every day.
He's on the speaker list, so I guess so.
All right.
Little did we know.
Derek, Patrick, and Mark will be in Stockholm at the end of the year in December. All right. So we're at time, but please join us on June 12th. We're going to talk about form options for SharePoint and Microsoft lists. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask Praxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues.